I will read the quote, this keynote quote from Hermes before we turn this meeting over to Desiree. It says that action based on spiritual insight has a moral simplicity that neither can be understood nor imitated by the lower mind. And Desiree, it is all yours. Head learning and soul wisdom.
So I'm starting out with this quote from Rumi stating, "A pure heart open to the light will be filled with the elixir of truth." I found that the words in this are telling because he's calling it an elixir. And we know elixir was a word that was popularized primarily in the Middle Ages with alchemistry and the alchemical process of using a substance to refine base metal into gold. I think this is really appropriate because it's about refining the mind to the point where it is in alignment with soul wisdom. Let's see if we can move this along. It was Plato who said that knowledge of the soul is the only universal truth and the one only wisdom. All other knowledge is transient, meaning that soul wisdom is a constant and everything else is working upon itself kind of in a progressive fashion, but is always changing, but it changes for a reason. Evolution cannot occur without change. So I'm just kind of using, these are just in my own words, based on some information that I've gathered and some thoughts and just internal thoughts. We can talk more about it if it needs refining later on, but head learning is knowledge acquired through the senses, sensations, reason, inductive and deductive, experience, memory, and psychic impulses, tendencies, and impressions. However, working without soul wisdom to guide it, the head learner cannot experience things in themselves, as Immanuel Kant expressed, being continually influenced by personal attachment to results of its own thinking, which is kind of like an echo chamber, and other aspects of the lower mind, such as the tendency to cling to personal biases and preconceived ideas and tendencies or skandhas. Oftentimes, the strictly head learner perceives itself as a closed system, unaffiliated and unaffected by or from with other living beings, and whose life is experienced in isolation. Because his mind is constantly on the move, the truth he seeks is also constantly changing and therefore always relative at a given place, time, and immediate condition. I'm going to be, most of these citations are going to be from Voice of the Silence. And so whenever you see some words here, those are citations. If they're in yellow, they're citations from the Voice of the Silence. So I'm not going to read them, but I'll hold the slide just a few seconds longer so everyone can read them, unless the citation is taking up the whole slide. Soul wisdom, on the other hand, is perception of the true nature of reality without the confines of conceptual knowledge. It is clear and immediate discernment, experienced as intuitive or direct insight. It is a knowing beyond the known, signifying awakening to the eternal self beyond the self, memory beyond memory. Soul wisdom also carries with it a universal moral code that is believed by the mind, but is experienced directly through the heart of compassion. And I put believe there in quotes because it's almost as though the mind adopts a certain kind of moral code that's more utilitarian that it can use that helps to support a communal life. And of course, we can talk about these definitions if they need refining later. Alignment of the mind and heart. Intellect plays an important part in the alchemical refinement of thought, which, when centered on universal concepts, the interdependence and oneness of all life, and a will that seeks truth for the sake of truth itself, without the obstruction of fear or personal attachments to results, awakens the mind's memory or reminiscence of its true nature, place, and purpose in the cosmos. This awakening of the mind can only be done through self-devised efforts, a few listed here, with an unwavering reverence of the divine for nature, her laws, and her teachers. Wanted to talk a little bit about this term, jhana. I'm not sure I understand it completely. I'll admit Shobha right now. Thank you. But the way I understand jhana is a part of this transitional process of mind, because it is dealing with knowledge, but it's dealing with a certain type of knowledge. It's not necessarily worldly knowledge, but what it is, I believe, is knowledge that is directed and focused toward or inward toward a more spiritual understanding of our condition. And so it is part of this alchemical process. And I know that there's many different kinds of jhana in the Buddhist tradition that revolve around the evolution of the mind as it gets centered. But there's an important part of our head learning. There's a reason why nature goes through all the trouble of putting a consciousness into a reflective state. If you're in the light and you live in the light, you can never really even know the light. You need to know something that's outside of the light or that light's shadow in order to be able to understand what it is in a reflective state. And we know this is a universal occurrence, that to ask questions is part of our inheritance, so to speak. Children ask questions at a very, very early age. It's a natural inclination to know. If anyone's been around children who ask why constantly, you give them an answer and they want to know why that. You give another answer, they want to know why that. They're always trying to get at the crux to something that they can actually understand. They're always trying to piece together the mystery. And we do that as adults too. We're trying to piece together the mystery. In the words of Steve Jobs, who also was a Buddhist, he said, creativity is all about making connections. And he's right. In this reflective state, that is what we do. And it's all a part. I mean, we don't necessarily do a really good job of it because our lower mind tends to want to hang on to those and cling to those preconceived ideas and biases that revolve around the ego. But it is a part of this whole law of correspondence. It's not just a Hermetic law, it's a universal law. And if we consider that the unchanging truth here in the center is our core, and we experience that core through these more long-term devices, and those, which is philosophy, our intuition, our devotional practices, our sacrifice and service to others through lore and mythology. On the outside circle here are the ones that change constantly. The outer ring represents temporal influences such as social, economic, political, science, education, family, national, gender, conventional laws, et cetera, et cetera. These are always in flux. They're in flux depending on what, with the changing of time. So the nice thing, though, is we can actually begin to see how universal truths can make their way out to the outer rim, but they have to go through this middle part here. It has to be perceived through these intermediary intuitive processes. It'd be interesting to kind of stand in the middle where the middle line is, where the middle circle is, and extend outward so that we can make a balance between the internal and the external. perhaps that's what humanity in the long term is going to do. There's a very, this particular article kind of hit me, so I decided just to put it in the way it is. Came out of Chopra.com regarding the spiritual heart, because we talk about awakening all the time, but we're not awakening the heart, we're awakening the mind. The spiritual heart has no physical form and so is limitless. It's our connection with the divine and is like an inner sun that shines forth divine light into all areas of our lives. The spiritual heart is always awake, always ready to light our path to enlightenment. Even though we may say we are awakening the heart, what we are really doing is reawakening our memory of it. Through years or lifetimes of neglect, we have allowed it to become covered over and hidden from view. But just like the sun on a cloudy day, it patiently waits for us to remove the coverings. I think it's a beautiful statement. So many of the citations are from the Voice of the Silence, which is a mainstay for most theosophists, I believe. And it has 3 fragments. The first that deals primarily with learning how to identify and to control the lower mind and all the tendencies that come with it. The second focuses primarily on, although not solely on, the 2 paths, which is the doctrine of the I, that of the crowd, and the doctrine of the heart, which is the esoteric, the internal, the real internal work. It's purification of the lower forms through devotion to humanity, through renunciation of eternal bliss. And then the third fragment really focuses on renunciation through the fixity of mind on the 6 virtues or the 7 virtues. I like to say 6 because I think at some point they all culminate into one, but I wanted to focus on the 2 paths here. Now, I know that all of these topics get discussed through, there's discussion on them all the way through the voice. And there's just certain areas that get focused on more than others in these 3 fragments. And so we'll be looking primarily on those 2 paths. It is written that before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the I from the heart doctrine. But the seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs breadth and depth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's realm, but soar beyond illusion. Search the eternal and the changeless thoughts, mistrusting fancies, false suggestions. I wanted to talk about the heart, just how we use that term colloquially in our everyday language. Because I think it's important what is our relationship with even the term heart. I want you to sort of scan these definitions a little bit, and you'll find that they really talk about home, compassion. They talk about empathy, the core of something, benevolence, the center, the essence or substratum. And it's also associated with determination and persistence and fearlessness and endurance. Why do we use heart in these ways? I think there's something very intuitive about the way we use this word because it has such a special meaning as it operates within our body. Furthermore, nothing exists without a center and therefore without a heart. Everything from an atom to a great galaxy has a center. And when we think about the hearts or centers, that they are the knots of Fohat, and that is the eros of love divine, signifying the law of all laws, which is compassion. Think about how everything has a center, and all of those centers are those knots of Fohat. The more I contemplate this idea, it really demonstrates, not just to my heart, but my mind, just how interconnected everything is. And it's all based in this law of all laws. I had to bring this in because Simone Weil wrote basically just a phrase here that just so appropriate for today's talk. And at the center of the human heart is the longing for an absolute good, a longing which is always there and is never appeased by any object in the world. And we think about the condition of human beings today, almost every day. It seems to me that we're all looking to get back to our original state, to that state of love and compassion. It's almost like we're missing it so terribly that we're looking for anything to fill that void. And oftentimes, most times, we try to fill it with things that are just not healthy for the heart. And it just makes us sadder and sadder. So in many ways, she is right here, but it's never appeased by the objects of this world. The pupil must regain the childlike state or child state he has lost before or ere the first sound can fall upon the ear, the voice of the son. I love this picture. It reminds me when I was a little girl, before I even understood what stars were. We had a patio that looked out over the streets. It was up. It was before, high-rise buildings were around, and you could see the sky quite well, even with the city lights. And I wondered what they were. I was in this state of awe. And I thought to myself, it's almost like a blanket. And I'll get to the blanket in a minute, but it was almost like a blanket with these little slits in it. And the light was shining through these slits. And I wanted to know what was on the other side of the blanket or the covering. But I remember, in retrospect, I remember feeling this absolute love. I knew that the cosmos or these things were watching me. And that there was this boundless love, almost like a blanket wrapping me. When we think of a small child looking up to the magnitude of this mysterious sky, remember the child does not have a language well developed in their mind. And they're working with a silence. They're working with an awe. And it's that awe that is almost the highest form of worship when you think about it, because there is no language limiting what they are experiencing. It is completely experiential. And so when I try to think back to the way I was when I was a child, I often think about music because, and I just noticed this not too long ago when I was laying down very peacefully listening to Tchaikovsky and Vivaldi, and my heart just loves harmony. And I was also listening to some choral music, spiritual choral music that was being sung beautifully in a large chapel somewhere. And I remember not thinking. And I have to say, most people, I would imagine, in that state, their mind does not chatter. I could think of myself being just a leaf floating on the ripples of a lake, that my mind and my heart were moving to a sound. And I think it's that sound that penetrates the child's heart. There's something in there that the heart opens up to. It's very natural for that to happen. When it says in the voice, the pupil must regain the child state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. We are talking about a sound, but in order for that sound to be heard, it must come into a medium of silence. I wanted to bring you this idea of a rose, because fear oftentimes contracts, whereas love expands. And so if we think of the heart as a rose, when it's in danger, when thoughts around it are not in agreement with its natural condition, it's going to close up to protect itself. I think that's a natural process. I think oftentimes that's what our own heart does. When ill thoughts run through our system, we experience a pain, an oppression. The heart will pound faster. It's almost like it's trying to get that idea off of it. There's a reaction that the heart performs. It's a warning to go somewhere else. It's a warning. I like to use the analogy of a canary in the mine, because if a canary is exposed to toxins, it will die. I'm not saying the heart's dying, but it's giving us a signal. And I'm sure, we're familiar with those different signals. But when it's exposed to some ideas that are universal, it's almost like the heart becomes happy. It opens up. The pressure is released. It experiences calm, assurance, confidence, and bliss. Where it says the rose must re-become the bud born of its parent stem before the parasite has eaten through its heart and drunk its life sap. And I wanted to know what it meant to re-become the bud, because it could have this meaning of protection, but it could also mean reunification with its parent source, to become a child again. I think that's probably the more immediate rationale for it, to go back and re-become the child again, because it's in that state that the voice of the silence can really be heard, when the mind is hushed. And I just talked a little bit about this already, that when we're exposed to ideas and when we perform service to others, the heart really does rejoice. There's references into the voice where the Bodhisattva has met the challenge and he's made it to the very end, and all of nature is rejoicing. But the truth is, your own heart rejoices whenever it is exposed to ideas that are in agreement with the laws of nature. And we feel that. We also feel it, just the opposite, when it's exposed to toxins. When the mind is directed towards sound, the sound of compassion, the heart opens and rejoices. This is very true. We can read this here. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself hast wiped it from the sufferers. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisances. And she will open wide before thee, the portals of her secret chambers lay bare before thy gaze, the treasures hidden in the very depth. I didn't want to go too far without giving some time to our teachers. And it is said that the teachers operate, or our great sages operate under the same heart, the secret heart. And from this point forward, I would like to have others read, if that's okay. Anybody daring enough? Anybody?
I'll read.
Oh, good.
Should I read? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So The Open Heart, Theosophy Magazine, March 1943, Volume 31. Discipleship is but the dawning realization of that vision of eternity gleaming over the horizon of human existence, casting long rays of encouragement and promise to the aspirant. To the mind, it unfolds the relative unities of all that live, displayed in mighty panorama, complete, all parts connected by the fires of life, yet infinitely diverse in degrees of being and regulated relations under law. To the heart, it is a feeling that comes from a higher world, untouched by the cravings of matter, unsustained by anything save itself. Like a divine descent, it shines through the eyes of mortal man, making him, for the moment, a god. It surges through him, encompassing his whole being, and, unlike the psychic enthusiasms of the personality, this feeling of divine compassion strengthens the will and brings certainty to the discrimination. One who has seen this vision, if only as in a dream, no more will question warily for proofs that he has lived before, nor tax with injustice the natural order. He has reached into the soul of things, has won a glimpse of that which wise men speak of but cannot give away. He is beginning to open his heart.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you. Can someone continue? This is the same article that Jonathan loaned me. Can someone also help to read?
I can read this.
Hey, Shobha.
The Open Heart continued. Brotherhood is not merely a desirable sentiment, an efflorescence of the socially educated man. It is an immutable law which works from within, without, to shape every expression of intelligence, to define every human relation, and finally, to limit all actions which are in violation of the essential unity of the human race. Substantially, it is the presence in every man of the Akashic essence, the very stuff of knowledge or wisdom, which unites in one fraternity the sages and perfected men of every age. One in their spiritual being, they become hierarchically united in manifested existence through their possession of the one truth. Their hearts, wherein meet will, knowledge, and compassion, are the links of this great band of brothers. They are perfect because naught but their sense of oneness with the whole keeps them in manifestation. unwilling to accept the bliss of the absolute unity, while other units still strive with their own ignorance. These great ones preserve in themselves the pattern of achievement, and so are indeed the way, the truth, and the light. It is the field of fraternity in spirit which every earnest lover of his fellow carries about with him. Simply the resolve to see in other men, all of them, the souls that once they knew but now forget, will open channels of the heart. How can we tell what ancient sadness begins to dissipate under the rays of a friendly smile? What weakness is assailed once more because of some friendly encouragement founded on the sole point of view?
Thank you, Shobha.
You're
I'll read
welcome.
this last piece. Starting from the spiritual identity of all selves and passing down the scale of differentiation, there is first the unity of knowledge. Knowledge is participated in by all men in some measure, each in his own degree, according to self-realization. Substantially, it is the presence in every man of the Akashic essence, the very stuff of knowledge or wisdom, which unites in one fraternity the sages and perfected men of every age. One in their spiritual being, they become hierarchical. Oh, did I already read this? Hierarchically united in manifested existence through their possession of the one truth. Please tell me, am I reading a replication here?
Yeah, it seems like
Well,
it.
okay. Okay, well, let me skip that then for now because I don't need to read it again. But I do want to get into this article from the Secret Gateway. HPB writes, there is a road steep and thorny, beset with perils of every kind, but yet a road, and it leads to the heart of the universe. I can tell you how to find those who will show you the secret gateway that leads inwards only and closes fast behind the neophyte forevermore. There is no danger that dauntless courage cannot conquer. There is no trial that spotless purity cannot pass through, nor difficulty that strong intellect cannot surmount. For those who win onwards, there is reward past all telling, the power to bless and save humanity. For those who fail, there are other lives in which success may come. And in the voice to that point is written, yet if the doctrine of the heart is too high-winged for thee, if thou needest help thyself and fearest to offer help to others, and thou of timid heart, be warned in time, remain content with the eye doctrine of the law. Hope still, for if the secret path is unattainable this day, it is within thy reach tomorrow. And I wanted to also talk about this kind gentleman here. His name is John Butler. He's a Christian mystic. Just happened to come across a podcast last night, and I needed to find out more about him. He's an elderly gentleman, as you can see. I believe he was 79 at the time of the broadcast, and that was about 3 years ago. So he's in his early 80s now, and he's just this very kind, soft-spoken, beautiful soul of an individual who, even though he was a devout Christian, started meditating at a very early age. To him, that was prayer. And he meditated in silence. Excuse me. As he was being interviewed, the commentator asked him a few questions about his being brought up. He was brought up on a farm. His father was not only a farmer and a sheep herder, but also a carpenter. His father taught him to pay attention to bring his attention to whatever he was doing, whether it was doing carpentry or shearing the sheep or farming. He, by the way, brought organic farming to Europe back in the 70s, which was pretty innovative at the time. But he found himself, even as a young lad, he loved nature. He always wanted to be where nature was. In a very, his heart just was so attracted to being in the presence of nature. So he already had this very strong connection with animals and trees and growing things. But he had a very difficult time when he was sent to go to a boarding school. He was exposed to the worldly things, and it led him off and on into times of depression. Just didn't know where he fit in. And later on in his life, and he went through many ups and downs and bouts of depression because of it. He had lost his love, he had lost his farm due to financial issues, and he had lost his way. And he's explaining what he had gone through, that it was so painful for him to lose not just his farm, but his beloved sheep. Everything was beloved to him. They weren't just things. He held them in high regard and in reverence. And the commentator asked him, was there one incident in particular? And this man had been through many meditative experiences, high experiences. And the commentator asked him, was there any one event in particular that really affected him? He said the most spiritual moment he ever had, when he was in deep depression, he was sitting out on his farm. He knew he was going to lose it and lose his beloved sheep, everything that he held in such high regard. And he was depressed. There was an old ram that was on the property amongst all the sheep. He called it the Old Warrior. And the reason he called it the Old Warrior, because this ram was real rambunctious, and he fought off all the other rams, and because of it, he had scars on its head. He said that in this moment of just complete depression, this ram casually walks all the way from the other side of the field over to him. And once it gets to him, it puts its head in his lap. And in that moment, which only lasted a couple of moments, it looked up at him and then walked away. As John, his name is John Butler, and as John was telling this story, a tear was rolling down his eye, down his face. I knew he wasn't trying to, in that moment, explain what had happened. Words can't explain that. He was living in the moment of the love that he was experiencing. And I started to cry because I could just sense that when you're in a place where words cannot explain, if you try to use words, it would just sully the experience. He wrote, and he's got a couple of books out, this gentleman. One is called Mystic Approaches, and another, Wonders of the Spiritual Unfoldment. But one of the quotes that the commentator brought up was this one here. Beyond the active mind lies another facility, quiet and reflective. And beyond that, again, an indefinable heart and soul. This is the innermost essence of what we are. A quiet mind may have aspects of eternity, but for further access to spirit, it is necessary to discover and work with the heart. In order to discover what we are, we must come to terms with what we are not. We must abandon the ego and listen. And by the way, all you got to do is take the T off of heart and you have hear. So I think it's a call to hear. And that's all I got for you. I have to apologize for that. I didn't realize I had duplicated things there.
Well, thank you, Desiree, very, very much for your wonderful storytelling about the rambunctious ram, and but also for creating in your kind of contemplative cadence of how you presented everything, the silence from which the wonderful sound of your wisdom was able to come through. So will you take any questions or comments?
Here for that, sure. And not just for me, anybody.
It's a group discussion, you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, it's a time for refinement.
Robert?
Boy, thanks, Desiree. Boy, that was just such a wonderful and heartfelt analysis of head learning and soul wisdom. I just wondered what your thoughts were about making connections, because the law of correspondences is, one of the fundamental features of theosophical thought. But we tend to think laterally rather than vertically. So I wondered whether you had any thoughts about that.
When we think laterally, do you mean like linearly?
Yeah, I mean, like we think on the physical plane, or, from sensory experience, and make connections in that way, where it's hard to make a vertical ascent to ideas or even formless realities.
I actually, I learned from you. I learned from everybody. And I think one of the things that I think this generation, Aquarian generation, is really focusing on now, and other people can comment on this, but it's this non-judgment. When people think linearly or even vertically, because once again, we're thinking in terms of results. I'm starting here, I'm ending there. This is more experiential. And so there's no real judgment in terms of, I don't know, refining. I think that oftentimes I feel like, and not just theosophy, because I know that there is an alchemical process taking place. But so much of that alchemical process is being done by nature through our thoughts. Anyway, yes, we do have to come to a point where we use correspondence and analogy so that we can put together the parts. But there does not have to be a personality attached, or I should say, selfish personality attached to that process. When an artist focuses on their art, or an athlete on their on conditioning, or a musician on their violin, they become that music, they become that art, they become whatever it is they're doing. So there's not a reflection back saying, hey, I guess I'm doing pretty good. I made it from this notch to that. No, there's none of that. They're so absorbed in that process that their name, their form, it disappears. It becomes irrelevant. Even if it's just for 30 minutes, it becomes irrelevant. And I think in that process of getting to the point when we are in meditation, when we are asking questions and studying and really involved in truth seeking, not evolution seeking, or not refinement seeking, but truth. I think that's when the real connections are made. But the mind has to get used to not looking back on itself and judging. You know, we're not just judging other people, we're judging ourselves constantly. It has to get away from that. And I think that's the point of the voice of the silence. In some ways, there's a sound that the heart resonates to. And that is what we need to connect with. That it's almost like fine-tuning the mind so that it pays attention. We are like farmers in a way. We grow things that we tend to. It really depends on what our attention's on. And if our attention is on something, it will grow. If our attention is, lackadaisical, it probably won't. So we are like farmers in that sense. It's one of the things I love about John Butler and his explanation and his love of his garden, his love of his animals, his love of nature. He's not loving himself, So it becomes so impersonal, but as it becomes impersonal, that compassion expands. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I hope it.
Well, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
There's another Maurice, or is it Jenny? Which one?
It's Maurice.
Hi.
Hi, I'm losing myself. There we go. I should put the start video. There. Oh, well, thank you so much for such a wonderful journey in the depths and then the silence of the heart. And I love the way you talked about sound and the sound vibrating in the heart, especially of the child. Wow, that was really quite illuminating and expansive. My question is, you've probably heard the term that we have knots in the heart. And that's probably maybe related to regenerating the mind, but I'm not sure. Could you, do you have any associations with the term knots in the heart and what that might mean?
So are you referencing the feeling of having knots in the heart or actual? Because
yeah, it's not the physical knots in the heart, of course, but it's mainly not being able to be wholehearted, being conflictual, having residues and karmic deposits that we have to work through. And that somehow that kind of constricts the heart, as you were saying about all those negative things, negative sounds and things that constricts it. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I think that the negative thoughts do constrict it. It contracts it. I don't think that the heart necessarily, and I probably have some opposition to this idea, but I don't necessarily think the heart is sick per se. I think the mind is imposing its will in a toxic way on the heart, and it is responding in a way that's natural to it. And that would come across as feelings of maybe knots. It's trying to tell you something. I mean, it's trying to tell me something if I'm having a thought that is, and especially if it's pervasive, it's going on and on and on. I can imagine that even a physical heart can get sick after a while. And I do think that there are some ways that we can improve the health of a heart, even a physical heart. through different types of therapy, music, dance, getting the mind to shut up. There are different, I think when we can get our minds under control so that they are quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's almost
What
like,
about what about ideas, like universal ideas?
absolutely.
Because that in itself can kind of take one out and harmonize the whole being, or coordinate the mind and the heart.
I think that's what we're supposed to do. I can't imagine a reason why nature in its ultimate wisdom would put consciousness in this reflective state,
Mhm. Yeah.
except to know itself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. And in order to know itself, it has to re-become itself through a reflective state, because it's knowing itself through its parts. We are those parts in a sense. Of course, the wholeness is within us, but in a reflective state, we have to work through the parts and connect them. And the connections, it's all in front of us. Nature, whatever's in us is also without us.
Mhm.
So it's just about being able to communicate it back. It breathes out, we breathe in. When it breathes out, when it breathes in, we breathe out. It's kind of an interesting give and take. But I like to always go back to breathing. But yeah, does anybody else have any suggestions or recommendations or input? No? Well, then.
I was trying to find something in one of BP Wadia's studies in the Voice of the Silences articles. And
Okay.
it's either The Wandering Heart or the Slayer of the Real. But there's a sentence in there, and I can't find it quite yet, about by discerning the what one's true motives are, and by the focusing of the heart, then that makes it so the focusing of the mind becomes much easier. But I'm not doing it justice. So maybe
Say that again. The
discussion.
focusing of the heart. What do you mean by focusing of the heart? Focusing on the heart?
Yeah, I think so. And then that makes the concentration of the mind much easier. So I think it has to do with becoming in tune with one's highest motives. Then that makes the focusing of the mind much easier. But let me find it, because I'm not doing
Well,
justice.
beyond focus, the mind needs to revere the heart. So it's not just a following. It's not just a getting an alignment. It's a following of it. It's a reverence of the heart. Remember how that fohatic thing is? That your heart is a fohatic knot. And what is foha? But eros, compassion, the law of all laws. And everything has a heart. Everything has a center. From the atom to the great galaxy, clusters, everything has a center. So when you think about that, it's a reverence to that heart. It's a reverence to the law of all laws. Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? We have a lot of good thinkers here.
I will
So
take a
there's
comment.
one. Judy?
Yes, in my study of Western literature, I found that the figure of Faust in Goethe is really the most powerful example of a being who becomes totally head learning and forget about soul wisdom until he realizes that he squandered his youth and life. And so he makes a pact with the devil to try to get something back that's spiritual, but then he falls into lust and seduction. And in one version, he goes to hell, and another version, he's redeemed. Depends whether you look at Marlowe or Goethe. But I think that's the perfect example of the academic who dislikes theology more than any other topic because it misses soul wisdom so badly. So
Yeah.
I just want to know if you'd agree with that.
We know HPV had a lot of critical things to say about our own educational systems, that they were so focused on the academics and focused on, creating little money-making machines that had no, that basically were thinking in isolation. And it's one of the worst things an individual can learn to do is think in isolation, because what they have to do is tamp down their intuitive instincts. It's a very painful thing to do. I was recently watching, have a lot of, and I don't want to, down other religions or anything, but we've got a lot of ex-Mormons, usually young people that are coming out of an indoctrinating system where they've been oppressed and abused and really, and basically told that to pay attention to their natural born intuitive instinct is wrong, and to follow this, these leaders over here that have just taken total abuse of them. Can you imagine when you're waking up to that, how you have to basically tamp down and ignore those, your intuition, which is screaming at you, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. Fortunately, people are coming out of that, but it's a very painful experience to have to go through that hell. But, that's the other side of the light, is the shadow. We learn what we are by learning what we're not.
Yes, it is very painful, but I'm afraid that the educational system does teach young people to compete with each other.
Right.
And also, there's this terrible fear among, I haven't taught for many years, but that if you major in some kind of liberal arts subject, you won't ever get a job. I don't know how many times that was said to me. And I got every job I ever applied for except one. But that is a tragedy of our educational system, which HPB is so clear on, even in the 19th century, and the key to theosophy. So thank you very much for your comments.
Jonathan?
Carolyn?
Yeah, I think I forgot my question, but I think my question is, it's about using the mind constructively, and so that you create a more welcome home, you might say, for better and higher thoughts to come to descend. And in that way, you really you open up, because there's more than one mind. Judge said we have multiple minds, so we have to sort that out and let the best mind prevail, even if it has to take leaps into better states of mind. In other words, you could have a run-in with somebody, and then we think we've got to analyze the interaction and focus on how to improve that. But sometimes it's just better to move on to a better level of thought, even if it's more vague than some of the types of thought that we get engaged in at the level of personality and the lower mind. So in a way, you have to outwit
So,
multiple minds in order to get into a rhythm that reveals truth and gets you gets you awake and moving, because moving on to new lines of thought is part of our capacity. So we just wanted to toss that in.
yep. And also, true discretion cannot grow in the soil of false judgment. So I think that holding back our judgment of others is a big piece of it. And I think educationally, it's filled with judgment. How many, I work for an educational institution, and I've seen so many students who don't do well and feel that that their low grades are a reflection of them. And we've done that to them. And I don't even believe in grades. I tell you the truth. Because that's a process of false judgment. How can we say an individual is not intelligent because they're not following this line of thought over here or that rationale over there? Perhaps they're emotionally intelligent or artistically intelligent or intuitively intelligent. But we've been very cruel to each other when it comes to education. And we've taught others to be cruel through this false judgment. And and the competition is ridiculous in my view. There's no reason to compete. We're here to learn. There might be educators that disagree with me, but I don't think they're here today.
Nathan?
Yes, Desiree, didn't you on May 20th do a talk that was related to like energy and the universe? And was that you?
I think it was electricity. That was my
electricity. We're talking about electricity, yeah. And so I was just thinking about Antoine. How do you? I can speak most any language except for French. I just butcher it all the time. But Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, is that how you say his name? He says, here, I'm going to post it in the chat.
Okay.
It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering if you could, since you did the presentation on electricity, which was so wonderful, I still remember it.
Well, thank you.
I'm wondering if you could talk about just the connection between, the invisible magnetism between perhaps this heart wisdom and possible head learning with a universal design for learning approach that includes multiple means of representation, expression, and engagement that would not be focused on grades.
Mm-hmm. Experiential, primarily. But also, we get back to the idea of the concepts of correspondences are really, really important that can be taught to children all the way through. And even the concepts of correspondence and analogy are a wealth of information there. And it helps to answer things that science is currently perplexed about, that religion is completely, off target about. Because they're viewing with religion, they're viewing God as something separate from nature, which it, of course, isn't. And they And in science, they tend to view and test things in isolation without looking at the whole picture. What is the whole picture doing? What is nature doing? What is it telling us? Instead, they try to tell nature what it's doing, and that's not how to figure things out. The best thing we can do for education is to teach people how to tend their garden, to pay attention, to watch, to learn, to examine the patterns in nature, to examine the patterns in themselves. There's so much that we can learn if we just got ego out of the way and started to pay attention. And again, I don't know if I'm answering your question. The thing about the electric universe I found so fascinating was how everything kind of looked the same. You know, we looked at the earth with all of the electricity going back and forth, triangulating all over the place. And then we look at the complexity of these, what are they called? The waves. Now I can't remember the names of them, but just the branches, the branching out of this interconnectedness throughout space, the web that's spoken of in stanzas, that it spans this web and it is just like a web, and it's interconnecting everything through these knots of fohat, these fohatic knots. You know, it makes you think not only about the interdependence of all life, but there's this overwhelming just love that emerges from the heart. It emerges from the heart. That's already there. Like, okay, I can open up now. And as long as we can begin to at least see the interconnectedness of all life, and those patterns, those fractals, everything is intelligence. You know, we think of ourselves as intelligent beings. We wouldn't have an ounce of intelligence if it wasn't for nature. It is from nature that we gain intelligence, and it's already in nature. Nature is the storehouse of it. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We think we're the end of everything. You know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our teachers before us, but they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the teachers before them. This is a continuum, but it all is stored in nature itself.
And that's the heart. That's the heartbeat. The fohatic heartbeat is passed on literally from birth to birth, through our family lines. It's like a bouncing ball. My son called it one time. He's like, we don't die. It's just like nobody dies. They bounce into another heart. And this is what's going on. And this, when you think about us and our relationship to the eldest brothers, the Dhyanis, right? I mean, that's who we are. We're this impulse, this love impulse that is just like, continuing. Yeah.
Pervasive, yes. Everywhere.
David, did you still want to ask a question or make a point?
Just a short comment, sort of a reminder of with what was spoken of earlier about the mind and the heart and what's going on within us. Just to recommend from time to time, Mabel Collins' Light on the Path, I think, is an excellent little thing that confronts both the mind and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Heart is that light. Yeah.
Thank you, David. Thank you, all of you, for your questions and comments. And above all, thank you, Desiree, for taking us just on such a wonderful journey. Wonderful. So thank you all for coming.
Yes. Enjoy your evening. Try to stay cool if you can. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Beautiful class.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye, Bob.